For the next, I don't know how many weeks it is, I think it's 6 or 7, 8 weeks. It's going to be a little bit different in here tonight because all the musicians and all the people that are in the worship choir and everybody is leaving. So it's just going to be us tonight. So I thought I'd have a little dining room chat with you this evening. And no, that is part of the message, but we have to adjust a little bit. The worship choir is getting ready for Easter, and so they needed time when they could practice, and so we're trying this to see how it works out. And so for the next several weeks, they'll be leaving. And so at the response time, at the end of the service, we don't have anybody to play an instrument, and so during our response time, we're going to play a song and allow that time to give us time to respond. So just bear with us this evening. If things seem like they're a little bit dysfunctional, we're just trying to figure it out ourselves and trying to make it all fit together and work and make the program the best we can for our Easter services that are coming up and for those that are coming. This evening, I really do just want to have if I can have a chat with you, if we can talk for a minute. This afternoon, Rebecca and I went to lunch and sat down at a table next to some ladies from our church. Didn't know that they were going to be there, and we sat down, and they turned around and started talking with us. And Donna Black, if you know Donna, she said, "What are you preaching tonight?" And I said, we're going to be talking about Psalm 23. And she went into about a 5-minute Donna Black talk about how good Psalm 23 is. And so if you have your Bibles, you can turn to Psalm 23. And tonight we're going to look at Psalm 23, and we're going to take a few minutes and we're going to point out a couple of things that this passage should not be new to anybody. There are so many times that this passage becomes a point at which it is a solace for our souls. We can go to this oftentimes at funerals. We have Psalm 23 read. At different times of dedication, Psalm 23 is read. Some of you, your favorite passage in the Bible is Psalm 23. Some of you, the first chapter of the Bible that you memorized was Psalm 23. I know for our kids, when they turned 4 or something like that, my wife began working with them and teaching them Psalm 23. We wanted them to know Psalm 23. And so this is not going to be new to you, this passage at all this evening, but maybe there's a thought here that you can take away from here, apply to your lives, and leave here tonight better because of our time together. So before we get into it really deep, let's just take a minute. We're going to read through Psalm 23. So follow along with me, and maybe you know it by heart, and you don't need to follow along in the Bible. You can just say it in your mind and in your heart. But Psalm 23 goes like this: "The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Psalm 23 is not new to us, but oftentimes when we're going through deep and difficult times, it is a nourishment to our soul. And so tonight I want to look at Psalm 23, but I want to start by showing you a picture. So this picture is a sheep by the name of Shrek. Now this is a real sheep. This is not for a stunt. This was Shrek the sheep. You can look him up online. He is famous. Shrek the sheep, that is his shepherd that is beside him. And as I saw Shrek the sheep, and I thought of Psalm 23, I thought of a number of truths that Shrek can give to us this evening. Now, as you look at Shrek, you notice one thing about him. There's a lot of wool there. A lot of wool. Now, I don't pretend to know anything about sheep. I am not a shepherd. I've never done anything with sheep. I do know that the Bible compares us to sheep. And I've always heard, throughout different messages or sermons or times that God calls us sheep because sheep need somebody to lead them and guide them and direct them. Sheep aren't very smart. I don't like that personally. I would rather be a smarter animal. But God says that we are like sheep. We need a shepherd. Shrek is kind of a picture of how we really are. You see, Shrek wandered away from his shepherd for 6 years. Shrek lived in a cave. His shepherd could not find him. But Shrek lived in a cave for 6 years until somebody found him. You notice that the wool around Shrek, you notice that you can barely see his legs there. You can't hardly make out a face. All you see is that nose and that mouth sticking through all of the wool that was there. And how like Shrek we are when we get away from our shepherd. They shaved when they shorn, I think that's the word, when they shorn, took all of the wool off of Shrek. They took 60 pounds of wool off of Shrek, enough wool to make 10 men's suits. Isn't that just like us? When we get away from our shepherd, we begin carrying weights that we don't have to carry. We begin carrying burdens that aren't necessary for us to carry, that our shepherd wants to help us to bear, but because we're stubborn and because we are prone to wander, we end up carrying burdens. Shrek was gone for 6 years, and who knows what Shrek did for 6 years. It looks like he grew a lot of wool, so he must have been eating something right. But Shrek lived alone for 6 years. I heard and read a story that a shepherd was tending to his sheep, and he said sheep are so dumb that I think the number was 1,500 sheep. One sheep walked off a cliff, and 1,499 followed that sheep. 400 and something were killed. The rest of them were not killed because of the soft landing that they were now jumping off this cliff, landing on all of these sheep, that it was soft, and they survived. But 1,500 sheep walked off a cliff because one did. Ooh, that's cool. Let's go this way. Off the edge of the cliff. Now, I don't like that about me. But isn't that us? Isn't that how we are, that we are so quickly drawn away from following our shepherd? We see something shiny, we see something neat, and all of a sudden we're running this direction and we're going off a cliff, and we look at ourselves. And the shepherd was saying that in the same story that he had a sheep that fell off a cliff 10 feet down to eat a tree that was on that ledge. He said he had to wait for that sheep to finish eating. So it was days and weeks. He had to finish eating, and then the sheep had to get so exhausted trying to get back up, and he couldn't, that the shepherd had to wait for that sheep to basically say, I give up. So that shepherd could reach down with his crook and pull the sheep up, because otherwise the sheep would fight him and the sheep would run off the edge of the cliff and die. But that's what God says that we are. God calls us sheep. And he says that we are like these. So if you look at this passage as we go down through, that we see in verse number 1, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Unlike Shrek, we have a shepherd who wants to take care of us. Shrek had a shepherd, but he wandered away, and as a result, he took on things and weights that he didn't need to carry. Verse number 2, he makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. Look at Shrek here and look at his face, and think with me for a second. The Bible is very specific about leading us to still waters. Think about Shrek if he got near a river that was moving quickly. He sticks his face down in that water. What happens to wool when it gets wet? It gets heavy. Shrek, in rapidly moving water, is going to drown. And so our shepherd takes us to calm waters so we can be nourished, so we can be reinvigorated, so we don't drown in the attempt to get into the rushing, the fast-moving waters, and how in life oftentimes we get into the deep waters, we get into the fast-moving waters, and we find ourselves over our heads so very quickly. In verse number 3, he says, he restores my soul. They showed a picture of Shrek after they took all of his wool off, and he almost looked like he was smiling. He became famous because of this picture. He was, I think it was in, not Australia, but out that direction. He was well known, and the mayor of the city that he was from came and took a picture with Shrek after he was shorn. And he became famous, and he almost looked like he was smiling. He looked happy because now he had a shepherd that was going to take care of him. He restores our soul, and our shepherd does the same thing for us. Our shepherd is the one that we go to when we need something, and our shepherd is the one who says, hey, hang on, it's okay. It's okay, we got this. Don't worry about it. Don't stress out about it. I'll take care of you. Don't worry and don't put too much pressure on yourself. I've got this. Our shepherd restores our soul. Verse number 4, he says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. He is with us in the shadows. You know, as I was talking to our chapel this week, and I was telling them, and I realized as I was telling the story about our church's basement, that our church has no basement. If you ever grew up in a church that had a basement, there was nothing creepier than a church basement. Nobody agrees with that. Everybody's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Our church had a basement, and every time my dad would tell me, my dad was the pastor, and every time my dad would tell me, hey, run down there and turn off all those lights, I did not realize how fast I could get up those steps after turning the lights out in the basement of the church. It was scary. Church basements are scary, but you know what? There's nothing there. It's all in our minds. And how many times we go through something that we think is big, but we misjudge it, and God says, I'm walking through this valley of the shadow with you. It's not going to get you. We're coming through it. Notice it says we're coming through it. He's coming through the valley with us, and it is just a shadow. Now, this is the shadow of death. And we know as Christians that we can rejoice in the fact that one day we are going to be with those who have gone on before us, because it is just a valley that we have to walk through. And when we walk through it to the other side, our Savior is there. Verse 5, it says, thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. My cup runs over. And this is where we come to our passage and our illustration here this evening. I don't think that we intentionally invite the enemy to sit at our table, but I know that there are times that the enemy does sit at our table with us. Around our anniversary time, my wife and I's anniversary, I try to be romantic. It is difficult sometimes, but I try. One year we were going to go to Chicago, and we were going to spend our anniversary in Chicago. And so as I tried to make sure that everything was perfect. I had our hotel booked. I had her gifts bought. I had the tickets for the things we were going to do purchased. I had the schedule, the itinerary, and if you know me, that is not me. I'm a fly by the seat of my pants. Let's see how this goes. We'll make it up as it happens. And I had everything planned out perfectly. And so I told my wife, I said, guess what? We're going away for our anniversary. We hardly ever get to go away for our anniversary because it's August 31st. School always starts the week before our anniversary. So we were always putting kids into school that first week, and we rarely get away, and we can't wait for the day that our kids get out of our house and leave us alone for our anniversary. It's going to be nice. But our anniversary, we took some time, and we went away, and we went to Chicago. We went to the Swiss Hotel. Now, don't look it up. It's expensive. And we went and we spent a couple of nights at the Swiss Hotel, and I could not wait to get there. We pulled up in our blue minivan, and I very proudly got out and handed my keys to the valet, and I'm like, you can park it wherever you want. Nobody's going to take it, so it don't matter. You can park it wherever you want. And I gave them my keys, and I walked away with my wife, and we had the guy with the cart hauled our luggage off into the hotel, and we were living on cloud nine. This was going to be our anniversary. We were so excited just to be able to get away. You know how it is when you finally get to the point where you can get away, and you know it's just going to be a break? It may just be a day or two, but it is the break that you've been looking for. So we walk into the hotel. We are celebrating our anniversary. This is a big day. And we walk into our hotel, and I did not realize that there was a Star Trek convention in our hotel. So when we walk into the lobby of our hotel for our romantic getaway, all of these Star Trek creatures are walking through the lobby, and they're walking around, and I am thinking, what happened to our romantic weekend? So we got to our room, we went out and did some things that night. The next morning, we got up, and I knew exactly when we were going to, I had this thing nailed down. We had to have breakfast at a certain time. We had to be here. We had to be at this place. We had to do this thing all for the next couple of days. We came in and we sat down at our booth, and we, as romantics, sat on the same side of the booth. You know how romantic that is when you actually sit on the same side of the booth. Not across from each other, but on the same side. It was that kind of a weekend. And we sat down, and the lady came up to us, and we're just like enjoying life. Like this is the best thing ever. We're young, we're in love. This is our weekend, we're celebrating, and she's like, oh, glad you guys are here. We're like, yes, it's our anniversary. You know, it's that newly married where you're just happy to tell people it's our anniversary, we're excited to be here. And she came and she took our order, and we began talking, and as we began talking, I began to pick up a conversation that was happening in the booth right in front of us. You know how that is. You go into a restaurant and you're having conversation with somebody, but all of a sudden your attention starts getting drawn away to another conversation, and all of a sudden you lose track of what you're talking about here because you're listening to what they're talking about there, and you're more engaged in that conversation than you are in your conversation. That's what was going on. Except they were ruining our anniversary. The gall of those people to ruin our anniversary. There were 4 ladies, and I will use the term lady very loosely. There were 4 ladies that were sitting in the next booth, and the language that they were using was the language of sailors. If sailors talk that way, I don't even know, but that's what I hear. The vulgarities that they were saying, the subject matter that they were talking about, and it began to boil my blood. And my wife could see that I was getting really irritated. And we began talking not about our marriage, our romance, our anniversary, our hopes and dreams for the future. We began talking about how they are ruining our weekend. And they would say something, and as you normally do when somebody's saying something that they're not supposed to, you clear your throat. And they didn't notice. And they just began to be more and more vulgar in what they were saying. And I got up, I walked over to their table, and I said, do you mind? We are trying to celebrate our anniversary over here, and you guys are talking filth, and you guys are talking foul, and it's ruining our day. Would you please stop? And I turned around and walked 3 feet to my table and sat down. In hindsight, that might not have been the best thing to do. And then they began talking about us. They're only 3 feet away. I can hear what they're saying. And they began talking about us. And they ruined our meal. Because we allowed them to have a seat at our table. They weren't at our table, but we allowed them to have a seat at our table. You see, this verse number 5, it says, "Thou preparest a table before me." Ephesians chapter 4 tells us that we are not supposed to give place to the devil. We're not supposed to give him place. Now, I brought some things with me this evening. My mother, she made sure that as a young man that I knew how to set a table. That is a lost art today, learning how to set a table. People, they throw things on the table. They set it however they want. You tell your kids to go set the table, and what do? Like, you're lucky to get a napkin. There's one fork for the whole family to share, and you're like, seriously? Like, we all have to eat here. I know, I'm just going to eat with my hands. No, get a fork. So my mother, she made sure to teach me how I am supposed to set a table. And excuse me for a minute while I set the table. And she would tell us that you are supposed to have a plate. And on top of your plate, you have a salad plate. And on top of your salad plate, you have a bowl for soup, if you're going to have soup. And she taught us that there are multiple utensils that when you set a table, that the fork, don't ever drop your stuff on the floor, that your fork is to go on the left, your knife and your spoon on the right. Now, some of you put all of your utensils together on the same side, but my mother is right, because she might see this. And she taught me to put the fork and the knife and the spoon, and sometimes she would tell me to put a little spoon at the top of the place setting for sugar or cream. She would have me put a napkin with either a napkin ring, or she would even teach us how to fold napkins so that they were nice and neat for our company to come over. And my mom was meticulous about setting a table. If you go over to her house today and it's a family dinner, she will have the fine china that comes out, and she'll have the silverware that you see once a year. It comes out, and she'll have the goblets and the cups and the bowls she even uses the little tiny coffee cups that you can't get your finger through the loop, that there's like enough room for one sip of coffee, and you're like, can I get a refill? Like, just stand here with the pot so I keep drinking it. And that's my mom. And she took meticulous care of how to set the table. Because my mother understood a couple of things. She wanted us to understand that it's not about the stuff on the table, it's about the company you have at the table. See, this, when you have people over for dinner, or you have people over to your house, there's some people that you let into the entryway, and that's as far as they get. You know those entryway people? The kid who comes around selling little cards. He gets into the entryway. You don't say, hey, come on and let's eat dinner with us. I don't mean unless you know him. He gets in the entryway. There's some people that get into the living room. You have friends. My grandmother and grandfather, they had a living room that had the plastic on the furniture. We as kids were not allowed to go into that room. I remember a few times we were brought into that room and we sat on the floor. We weren't allowed to sit on any furniture. You sit on the floor and you just watch the adults. The plastic on the furniture. There were some people that were able to get into the family room. And there's some people that are dining room people. They sit around the table. Those friends that you get together with, those friends that you enjoy time with, those friends that you say, come on over, and you sit around the table and you drink coffee and you have pie and you help yourself to the fridge and help yourself to the pantry, whatever you want, just come on in, and you bring them in and you sit them around the table. See, my mom understood that it's not about what's on the table, it's about who's at the table. God has prepared for us a table, and it's not about what is on the table, It's about who's at the table. And so many times we get discouraged and we get disappointed and we get disillusioned with the table because we think it's about what's on the table and it's not about who's at the table. And so we allow the enemy to pull up a seat at the table. When we were in Chicago and my wife and I were in that hotel and we're trying to have breakfast, all of a sudden the enemy pulled up a seat at our table and made us unhappy, not with what we were eating, but who we were with. And the enemy tries to get us to allow him to have a seat at the table. Sometimes the enemy gets a seat at the table because of the things that are at the table. And we begin looking at somebody else's table. You ever been to a restaurant and you see food pass by and you're like, ooh, that looks good. What are they eating? Man, I wish I would have ordered that. Oh, I wonder if I could send it back. And you begin looking at somebody else's table and you become disillusioned with your own table. God prepared for us a table specifically for you. You see, your shepherd knows you. Just like this shepherd knew who Shrek was. He saw Shrek and he knew, that's my sheep. Our shepherd knows us, and he has set a table for us, and he knows what we are supposed to have at our table. He knows what we need at our table, and if we don't become disillusioned with what is at our table and who is at our table, we can find great joy. But what happens is oftentimes we bring things to the table with us. You go out into public, and you're going to see people that are going to bring stuff to the table. Because what's at the table and who's at the table is not enough for them. They need to have something more, something that they add. And what happens is that when we allow the devil a seat at our table by bringing things that don't belong at the table, it becomes a distraction to us. You ever see a family that's out to eat and all of them are sitting there looking at their phones? And you think, wow, you didn't have to go out to eat to do this. You could actually stay home and avoid each other. You don't have to go anywhere to do that. You don't have to pay money for that. What we've allowed is we've allowed into our lives a distraction that makes us unhappy with the table that God has set for us. And what God is trying to do is he's trying to get us to the point where he says, I am your shepherd. I want you to be satisfied not just with what I have prepared for you. I want you to be satisfied with who I'm here, who you're here with, which is our shepherd, our Savior. And I don't want you to allow the devil, I don't want you to allow the enemy to be able to get a seat at the table, because when he gets a seat at the table, all of a sudden we are no longer satisfied with the things that God has provided for us. We allow the devil to take a place at our table when we begin to quit speaking truth and we start believing lies. I was talking with a young couple this week, and they were going into some issues and things that they're having, and I said, you have to quit believing the lies that the enemy is telling you. You see, the enemy tells you you're not good enough. The enemy tells you you're not smart enough. The enemy tells you that you don't deserve to be at the table. The enemy tells you that you're not a good enough wife. The enemy tells you you're not a good enough husband. You're not a good enough employer. You're not a good enough employee. You're not good enough for, and it keeps going on and on and on again. And we begin to believe those things. We begin to believe that we aren't good enough, but the truth is we're not good enough. The only reason that we are worth anything is because of Jesus Christ, our shepherd. You see, Psalm 23 is here to encourage us. Psalm 23 is here to strengthen us. Psalm 23 is here to give us hope. But why? Look at verse number 5 again. Psalm 23, verse number 5. It says, Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Do you know why God gives us this table to sit at? Because he gives us these blessings of life that we then can share with other people. You ever been invited to a table that you didn't deserve to be at? The kids' table. Do you remember Christmas time going to Grandma's house? And there was the adult table, and there was the kid table. And you were at that age where technically you could be at the adult table, but there wasn't room. And so you, at 16, had to sit at the kid table. And at the last minute, Uncle Bob didn't show up. And so they call you up. It's like going to the major leagues from the minor leagues. Like, I just got called up. I'm going to the big table. Kids, it was nice knowing you. I hope you enjoy yourself at the table. I hope that you enjoy your Happy Meals and all the stuff that you get. But I'm going to the big table. I get to go to where the adults are. I get to have adult conversation. I get to have, like, they have more than water at their table. Like, they have pop. Like, I get pop this year because I'm at the adult table. You ever get invited to a dinner that you felt out of place at? Big names, people that you don't really know, politicians maybe. Maybe it's people that own businesses, whatever it may be, and you're invited to be part of this, and you go and you're just happy to be there. All these people are talking and you don't even care what is being said. You're just there for the food. Like, this is just, I don't care what is being said. I'm just here because the meal is going to be awesome. God sets a table for us that we don't deserve to be at, so that we can have a cup that runs over. You see, our Christian life is summed up in this passage. Our shepherd, he leads us. When we don't allow the shepherd to lead us, we begin to look like Shrek. We begin to carry weight and burdens that we don't need to carry. We begin to live a life that we don't have to live. We begin to wander when we don't have to wander. But when we allow our Savior, our shepherd, to lead us and to guide us and to give us hope, we live a life that we were meant to live. And when we live that life, our cup runs over and we're able to bless other people. Tonight, I want to ask you a question. Are you happy with the table that God has set for you? Do you find yourself looking around at somebody else's table wishing that you were over there? Or are you happy that God, who knows you, who created you, who formed you, who counted the number of hairs on your head, that God has prepared a table just for you? And can you find joy and happiness in the one who sits at this table with you? Tonight, I want you to evaluate your life. Have you allowed the enemy to get a seat at your table? You become dissatisfied with things that are going on. You've become dissatisfied with the life that God has given you. And so as a result, maybe you've gotten up away from the table. Maybe you spiritually look like Shrek. And you've wandered from your Savior. You've wandered from your shepherd. And it's time to come back home. It's time to give up and say, as Shrek did, after 6 years of wandering, I'm done. I'm going back. You see, we don't have to allow the enemy at our table. Our anniversary was ruined not because of the restaurant that we were at. Our anniversary meal was ruined not because of the people that were sitting 3 feet away. Our anniversary meal was ruined because we allowed the enemy to sit at our table. Tonight, maybe you can take a truth from Psalm 23 and you can apply it to your life. Maybe you can look and you can see that you have allowed the enemy a seat at your table, and as a result of that, you've become dissatisfied with what God has given to you. Maybe you've become dissatisfied with the things that God has prepared the table with. And I pray that you have not become dissatisfied with the one who is sitting at the table with you, and that's our Savior. Let's bow in a word of prayer.